I would be lying if I said psychedelics don't intrigue me. At their best, they can bring out beauty in the world you rarely notice. They can make you appreciate your loved ones, they can help you process trauma, and they can make you more spiritual. That said, I don't believe they're a panacea for the spiritual and mental health crisis we're currently living through. Their religious and spiritual aspect fascinates me, and that's the focus of this video. I want to look into why they make people feel so spiritual, and I also want to look at some ideas about what might be happening when we take them. There's always been a religious and spiritual element to psychedelic use. Historically, marijuana, mescaline, mushrooms, and other substances have been used in religious ceremonies. There's evidence of psychedelic use in the Americas, pre-modern Europe, ancient Egypt, and even ancient Greece. In his book DMT and the Soul of Prophecy, the pioneering psychedelic researcher Rick Strassman links the religious visions of biblical prophets to the psychedelic compound DMT. He suggests the chemical may have been released by the pineal gland in the brain without the use of a foreign substance. The Bible has no shortage of imagery that people who use psychedelics might recognise. The prophet Ezekiel's vision of God's chariot appearing in the sky above him reads similar to a psychedelic experience. Flashing lights, turning wheels, multiple-sided faces, animal imagery, and so on. In the Hindu holy text, the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna reveals the cosmic reality to Prince Arjuna, he describes a similarly powerful vision. He talks about infinite faces in every direction and light shining like 1,000 suns simultaneously rising in the sky. I'm not saying that the authors of these sacred accounts were on drugs, but that their experiences seem to line up fairly well with psychedelic experiences. You don't need scientific studies to come across accounts of the impact of psychedelics on a person's religious beliefs. There are thousands of testimonies on Reddit and YouTube of people transforming their religious ideas after taking things like DMT or magic mushrooms. You get atheists becoming believers and religious people becoming more open-minded about their ideas of the ultimate truth. According to researchers at Johns Hopkins, 58% of respondents in one study said tripping on DMT had triggered a belief in divine beings and powerful supernatural entities. To get some ideas of what might be happening here, I'm going to go off on a few interesting tangents. Tangent number 1. The brain as a sensory filter. The world you experience is not the world that there is. You see a representation of reality. That is the world as it appears to us as normal. The world we think everyone else also sees. But our idea of normal is actually a sustained illusion that hides reality as it really is. In The Doors of Perception, the renowned writer Aldous Huxley wrote, "Each person is at each moment capable of remembering all that has ever happened to him, and of perceiving everything that is happening everywhere in the universe. The function of the brain and nervous system is to protect us from being overwhelmed and confused by this mass of largely useless and irrelevant knowledge. By shutting out most of what we should otherwise perceive or remember at any moment, and leaving only that very small and special selection, which is likely to be practically useful." The universe is this overwhelming ocean of information. This information exists all around us, but we only experience it in the limited ways our brain allows us to. And this isn't a far-fetched theory, but observable reality. If we look at a tree, we see a version of it at a specific resolution. Not included in that image are the atomic structures of the molecules that the tree is made up of. The brain is a sensory filter which presents us with a manageable and relevant representation of the tree. Think of the image of the tree we see as a symbol of all the underlying qualities a tree possesses, but we do not see. The brain does the same thing with all of the matter and information that exists in the universe. Tangent number 2. The imaginal. When our eyes close, so does our view of everyday reality, and we enter a new place, the world of the imaginal. The French philosopher Henri Corbin described the concept when writing about the Andalusian Sufi mystic Ibn Arabi. He explains, "The imaginal world is not the product of imagination as a psychological faculty, but a true world, objective and real, which exists beyond the sensible and the intelligible worlds. It is the intermediate world where the spiritual takes form and the material is spiritualized." The imaginal world is what connects the spiritual world to the world we experience in everyday life, the material world. There's you doing real world things like looking at a tree. There's an imaginal world where you dream of a tree, and there's the spiritual world in which God creates the image of the tree. The imaginal is therefore the bridge between our everyday reality and the divine. The imaginal sounds a lot like imaginary, but they are not the same thing. We experience both in our minds. But imaginary is where we take all of our memories and the knowledge that we've built up over the course of our lives and deliberately create images or ideas using them. We have agency over the images that we imagine, and we can identify ourselves as consciously having created them. So if I told you to imagine a horse wearing a hat, for example, you might see something like this. You create that image based on your knowledge of what a horse and hat look like. The imaginal also happens in the same mental place where the imaginary happens, but the things we encounter there are not consciously constructed by us. So if someone has a dream, they'll meet people, spirits, creatures, etc. that are experienced in their heads, but those beings will act independently, like they actually exist. People will say, I saw my granddad in my dream last night, and not, I saw a figment of my imagination that looked like my granddad while dreaming last night. It doesn't matter if the characters in your dreams exist in everyday reality or not. In the dream, you'll experience them as real, and you don't appear to have any control over them. According to Ibn Arabi, human beings with their limited faculties cannot experience the magnitude of the spiritual world within the material plane. Material reality, with its physical limits and measures, cannot ordinarily grasp a divinity that transcends its boundaries. Any experience of the divine must therefore take place in the imaginal realm, where there are fewer restraints. Ibn Arabi would say the imaginal is just as valid a reality as the one we experience while we're awake. He would further argue that since we experience the imaginal as independent of our own agency, it provides the perfect medium for angels, spirits, prophets, and the image of God himself to present themselves to a person. The key to accessing the imaginal is for us to lose conscious control of the images that appear in our mind. That happens in dreams, during meditation, and also during psychedelic experiences. So now let's tie these ideas up with the psychedelic experience. One day David takes 4 grams of magic mushrooms. After around 45 minutes, he starts feeling nauseous. His ability to make sense of things like motion, colour, sound, and so on is disrupted. He has thoughts he would not normally think, and they feel like they're coming from somewhere besides his brain. This is the classic mushroom experience so far. He has a weakened footing in the outside world. The brain's ability to act as a reliable filter and produce stable representations of material reality is disrupted. David can no longer control the images his mind creates and presents to him. So what does his mind do? It steps back from everyday reality. And where has he found himself? In Henry Corbin and Ibn Arabi's world of the imaginal. He's in what feels like a waking dream state. Characters can now manifest. They can appear as angels, aliens, mythical creatures, mythic gods, saints, and so on. In this example, David meets an angel. He's experiencing this as real in his psychedelic state. This angel may start talking to him. It helps him access parts of himself that he neglects in everyday reality. It answers questions like, why am I here? Why am I unhappy all the time? Why do things feel meaningless? If you're someone who's never experienced something like that before, it's likely going to be a very defining moment in your life. And that could be enough to completely change your ideas on religion and whether there is a world beyond this one. You're watching this and thinking, spiritual awakening sounds great. What's the issue here? No, psychedelics are becoming very popular. People like Joe Rogan have turned them into a subject of everyday conversation, and even mainstream media is interested. That kind of popularity can lead to misconceptions about what these things do and a lack of preparation for their effects. Amongst less experienced users, they're made out to be spiritual steroids. And if you think of them that way, that's exactly what they will be. They'll give you the potential for spiritual muscle growth, but without appreciation for the hard work needed to build a strong spiritual body. Before launching ourselves into the world of psychedelics, we first need to deal with the things limiting our spiritual growth in normal life. A lot of that time, that's an ego that is out of control. The ego is the controlling mental force in day-to-day life. Its primary purpose is to ensure our individual needs are met, and that in itself is a good thing. We need a drive for self-preservation and progress in order to successfully navigate life. But when the ego is not under control, it acts exclusively in its own interests, to the detriment of other people and ultimately yourself. This is where things like narcissism, greed, hatred, etc. become issues. When we take psychedelics, the ego chills out a bit, overwhelmed by the enormity of the new experience. But when we're done, it's the ego's job to make sure we function in ordinary society again. And this is where the ego can turn itself into a false messiah. After a powerful psychedelic or religious episode, the ego feels like it's figured out the mysteries of the universe. It might make a person feel like they've met God or are God himself. They might feel superior to those who do not know what they know. They become spiritual narcissists. When these people are done tripping, they may feel that their behaviour is validated on the basis of their profound psychedelic insights. They are essentially trying to make sense of their experiences using the intellectual and moral tools they have available. And those tools might be very limited because they've never really made any effort to be spiritually balanced people outside of psychedelics. There's a verse in the book of Proverbs that reads, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding." It is the ego that encourages us to make sense of spiritual experiences according to our own whims and desires. In most cases, that will mean acting like an obnoxious, enlightened being. In others, it might lead to people placing their faith in charlatan spiritual gurus. In the worst cases, they will end up becoming those very charlatans and use their insights and experiences to exploit others for their own gratification. It takes a few seconds on Google to find dozens of news articles about shamans taking advantage of those attending their psychedelic retreats. That's obviously not to say that everyone who does psychedelics will turn into Charlie Manson or that all shamans are bad, but it is a warning against treating psychedelics as something that will fix all your ego issues, your negative personality traits, and your interpersonal relationships. Carl Jung reportedly said, "Beware unearned wisdom," and while I can't find a source for that, it's a perennial truth. Spiritual growth comes with effort, a lot of introspection, and an acceptance that we are always capable of evil. So why is this such an important issue right now? I think it's pretty obvious that we're living through a global spiritual awakening. If you've stumbled across this video, you've likely been asking questions about the universe and what you're doing here for a while now. It's dawning on us that there's clearly a void where spirituality used to be. And we're avoiding talking about it because of the stigma attached to organised religion. So much popular culture is aimed at avoiding mention of anything higher and even ridicules the idea of the sacred. We're desperate for answers about our existence, and this is exactly when we're most vulnerable to the wrong ones. In 1975, the Indian mystic Gopi Krishna explained our spiritual situation and the risks it poses. There is a rebellion against the existing order, because the brain has reached a state of development where the riddle of existence looms larger in front than it did before. This is the state of mind of millions of disillusioned young people of the world today. Modern psychology is absolutely dead to a most powerful impulse in the psychic makeup of man that has always been in evidence from the very dawn of civilization to this day. When thwarted in its mission, the impulse to find meaning can lead to social and political unrest, a craving for drugs, promiscuity, or other social evils, and even to violence. So, people are increasingly isolated and lonely. Their jobs are boring and soul-crushing. They paradoxically feel imprisoned by this order, even as it seems to slide into chaos. Spirituality gives meaning and order to that chaos. Psychedelics are the most surefire way of attaining spiritual insights. The perspective change that those realizations bring can be life-changing. But without spiritual maturity, those ideas are a lot to deal with. We may become tempted to think that we've found the cheat code to spiritual awakening. But a mature spirituality most often comes by listening to the voice that wants you to do the difficult thing, the things that require effort and dedication. Changing bad habits, one step at a time, so that we develop the sense of order needed to integrate psychedelic experiences. Controlling hedonic impulses so that we don't get lost in destructive behaviour. Making the time for religious ritual so that we stay rooted in traditions rather than making up new ones, and so on and so on. Psychedelics might be a way to jumpstart your spiritual awakening, but you need to do the real hard work yourself. There are no shortcuts on the journey.